What's up, everybody? Welcome back in another edition of the First and Orange podcast. Parker Gabriel here, Ryan McFadden over there, Denver Post Broncos reporters coming to you on the short week. Broncos lost Sunday, obviously, to the Jets. They turn right around and they play at Kansas City on Thursday night. Ryan and I both in transit on the way to, Arrowhead Stadium eventually. Later on today, we're recording this on Wednesday morning. So, Ryan, divisional action coming up. Should be an easy win for Denver, right, against the Chiefs?
If maybe in another universe, but in this universe, no, it won't be.
It's going to be, I mean, it'll be interesting, right? I mean, prime time Thursday night. Who knows? Maybe even your favorite NFL storyline, Taylor Swift, could be in the house. You never know, but one way or another, it's interesting and sort of. I don't want to. I mean, dire might be stretching it a little bit, but it's sort of a dire situation for the Broncos. I mean, they're 1-4. They've got 3 games to go here before the bye week, and the bye week for the Broncos purposes essentially doubles as the trade deadline, which is Tuesday, October 31st. So you've got this situation where you're teetering on the point of, it's already obviously a really bad start. You're teetering on the point of, whether it's salvageable in any way, shape, or form. And on top of that, you've got 2 games against Kansas City in 17 days, beginning tomorrow with a visit from the Packers sandwiched in between those. So, Ryan, I guess let's just start maybe broad and then we'll zero it in. What do you make of where the Broncos sit right now and what the next couple of weeks hold for them?
I don't think they're in a good spot. I probably said it a million times by now. I felt like this schedule, the way the schedule was structured for the Broncos, it was they had winnable games where they can jump out to, let's say, 3-2, 4-1. Where
Yep.
when you got to this point in the season, if let's say they go 1-2 against the Chiefs, or lose lose to the Chiefs, both games to the Chiefs, and lose to the Bills after the bye week, you're still in that competitive spot. Now you went from that to now you could potentially see this team losing the next 4 games. And
Yeah.
I know the Packers are struggling. I know Jordan Love has had a hard time getting acclimated to that starting role and taking over as the new franchise quarterback since Aaron Rodgers in New York. But this is the same Denver team that let the Jets just run them out the stadium.
Yeah.
They let a Commanders team who allowed 40 to the Bears come back, and they lost to the Raiders in week 1. So you're sitting here like, yeah, they had that Packers game in sandwich in between 2 tough matchups against Kansas City, but they have not shown me so far this year that they can win those winnable games, and that's, to me, that's the hardest thing. If you're not winning the winnable games, the games that you go in there as a favorite and even as a matchup favorite in different aspects of the game, and you still figure out a way to lose, I have no confidence in this team moving forward. Now, I don't think they're just going to have one win for the rest of the year, but I feel like it can get even worse just because they don't know how to beat the teams that they should beat.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think right now, like obviously we'll see what happens Thursday night, and you never know how teams come out of it health wise or whatever. But like right now, I think against my better judgment, I would probably, if you were asking me right now, who wins, not this coming weekend, but next weekend when the Packers come to Empower Field, I probably would lean toward Denver. But it just, like you said, I mean, it's hard to. That's not based in much of a lot of like what's happened on the field. I mean, it is, but ultimately the results have been that they're 0-3 at home, and they're 0-3 at home in games that they were favored in against teams that, obviously you thought differently about the Jets before Aaron Rodgers got hurt, but you're talking about 3 teams that probably aren't playoff teams in the Raiders, the Commanders, and the Jets. So there hasn't been very much in terms of good news. And then now, Eric Eager at Sumer Sports, friend of the program, tweeted out the other day that the Broncos, by their model at Sumer, have the hardest schedule remaining in the NFL, the single toughest strength of schedule. 2 obviously against the Chiefs starting tomorrow night. They've got the Bills on the road on Monday night. They've got both games against the Chargers left. It doesn't get easier from here. Cleveland is, if the Jets ran for 234 yards, obviously Cleveland's without Nick Chubb. There's not games on the schedule that you look at and go, oh, well, they'll be fine in that one. So it's an interesting position to be in. And obviously this is going to be a big part of the conversation over the next couple of weeks. But I thought it was interesting, drew some wry smiles around the beat group yesterday, Ryan, when Sean Payton, obviously only one day over there of access this week, just with the short week. But we were over there yesterday, and Sean Payton in his news conference was asked about the trade deadline. And he said, yeah, we're not trying to do business with any of our players, and we answer the phone, but we're not shopping anybody and all that. And 3 weeks seems like an eternity till a trade deadline. And that's fine, and that may be sort of the position that they're in right at this moment. But you've got to figure the way it's going, that the Broncos are going to be one of the key players on the trade market as October 31st gets closer.
Yeah, most definitely. Like I wasn't expecting Sean Payton to go out his way and say, yeah, if we lose on Thursday night, we're selling this. We're
Sell the farm, baby.
Yeah, we're selling the farm and we're moving forward. I wasn't going to expect that. But yeah, you have to think realistically here, where, like you said, they're 1-4. You got 2 matches against the Chiefs in a span of 3 weeks, and after the bye, you got the Buffalo Bills. If you're talking about if this team could be very well sellers at the deadline, because if you're at a point where you only have 2 wins or one win after this 3-game stretch, then or no wins at all. Like if you lose in these next 3 games against the Chiefs and the Packers, I think it's time you have to start thinking about that. You have to start thinking about, all right, how can we get more future picks down the road? Who on this roster can lead us in that direction, getting the future picks? And I think that's where you have to wonder is, will Sean Payton get to that point where it's like, yeah, I can't. I was wrong. I was completely wrong with this team. I was completely wrong about the situation when I got it. Let's just grind this out, trade some guys we can probably get draft capital for, and let's just go into next year trying to build this franchise into my image. And I think that's where he has to look at, because it's hard to look at this team to make a complete turnaround when they can't even freaking tackle anyone, and you let like I said, you let the Commanders come back, and you lost to the Jets, who did not have Aaron Rodgers, and they were playing with Zach Wilson as the quarterback. So if you're at that spot and you're at 1-4, it's hard to imagine this team trending in the right direction. And I could be wrong.
Yeah,
I could be wrong. And if they magically make a run, I'll be the one to say it on this podcast that I was wrong.
Yeah.
But through 5 games, they have not proven anyone wrong.
Yeah. No, they have not. Yeah, you're exactly right. And it's interesting, Ryan, because sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. That's interesting because last year, like for all the whatever, last week was Hackett week. We don't have to, keep going back to that necessarily. But one of the things that Hackett kept saying last year, they were in a similar spot, but they at least were, 3-3, and then it kind of went off the rails from there. But they had, he kept saying, the thing about the NFL is you just got to get hot in the middle of the season at some point. Like you just got to, if you win 3 or 4 games in a row, it doesn't really matter like where you started, that stretch. If you win 3 or 4 in a row, you're probably in the conversation. And that is true, but that's true this year for the Broncos, but we've already covered that the schedule seems to make that a pretty daunting proposition given what's coming up. And then the other thing is like, you have to make a decision before October 31st about whether you're going to, try to get some draft capital for some guys and all that. And so you're just like, the only way they can win 3 in a row before the trade deadline is to beat the Chiefs twice, which they haven't beat them once since 2015. So, the odds of that are obviously extremely long. And then it just becomes a matter of, one of the most interesting parts about the trade deadline will be just what do they see as good enough return, right? I mean, they obviously Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy were the subject of trade rumor and trade talk between teams for most of the summer. And George Payton and Sean Payton said they weren't just trying to give players away. They had high prices on both those guys. They didn't get what they wanted, and so they kept both of them. Now, half a season later, you just wonder how, maybe it's not different. Maybe they'll hold the price high on those guys and keep them if they don't get what they're looking for. But you just wonder with a half a season of data with this roster, if there are guys that they think a lot, quite a bit differently about in terms of what they'd be willing to take as the return.
Yeah, and to me, I think it's gonna be a tough decision. Because you can look at it. 'Cause I think ultimately it'll come down to is Sean Payton's gonna have to, as much as like sports is all about, staying in the moment and players and coaches say we gotta focus on the now. I think Payton has to look at it, all right, what can I do to like at least get this ball rolling
Right.
either next year or the year after that? Because I can't do this every single time. So that's where I feel like when they're sitting in those meeting rooms about in terms of trade deadline, that's what they have to look at. All
Yeah.
right, is there a certain guy that can help us recoup some draft capital that can help us down the road? Or it'll be interesting, and it'll be interesting if they magically beat the Chiefs twice, or even once, or they beat the Chiefs, or they beat the Packers and beat the Chiefs once. I think we're looking at a different conversation. Instead of selling, do they look like, all right, can we turn this around and still make the playoffs? But if you are trying to bring someone in through the trade market, what are you willing to give up, and how much are you willing to give up that you've already done already um, in the past? So they're in a very tough spot, and it's like it is so hard when you think of every scenario, hard to see things going the right way
Yeah.
or going in a way where they can just flip this around overnight. And like I said, I really believe. To me, I feel like Sean Payton may underestimated how tough of a spot Denver is in overall with everything from the roster, from contracts, all that. Where maybe he did think he can just come in and all they needed was him and some good coaching to turn the ship around. We're so far we're seeing it's going to take a lot more than that. And this trade deadline is going to be huge. And these next 3 games are going to be huge because I think that's going to decide the direction they're going to take moving forward.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. And it's one of the things I thought, Sean Payton, the line, we're not trying to do business with any of our players, obviously got the most attention. But I thought it was very interesting. It's maybe not a huge surprise, but I think it's telling when he was talking about he and George Payton, and they talked 3 or 4 times a day and all this, and he said, we feel like we have a good handle on our roster next year and the vision for the foundation of our roster next year. And part of the reason why that's interesting is because if you go down the list, aside from Russell Wilson, we all know what his contract status is. That 5-year extension doesn't even kick in until next year. But if you go down after that, I'm looking at over the cap right now. If you go by cap number down from there, Cortland Sutton, no guaranteed money left on his deal after this year. Justin Simmons, same thing. Garrett Bowles, same thing. DJ Jones, same thing. Josie Jewell, free agent after this year. Then you've got McGlinchey and Allen, obviously new free agents this year, going to be around for a while. So, but those guys, Sutton, Simmons, Bowles, Jones, Jewell, and then a couple other guys a little further down the list. Frank Clark, obviously free agent after this year, just signed the 1-year deal. It's not that like, just trade all of them. But when Sean says we've got at least a pretty good handle on what we think about our roster for next year, those guys, they're not going to tell us, obviously, but they know, generally speaking, who from that group, hey, we're interested in maybe restructuring this guy or extending this guy, bringing the cap hit down. Or they're doing good things for us now, but we're not winning and we don't really see them as a part of the future. And if that's the answer for any of those guys, whether it's Simmons or Garrett Bowles or DJ Jones or whoever, that's when the price comes down at the trade deadline. That's when you're saying like, well, realistically, we're thinking that this guy's either taking a major, pay cut or we're releasing him after the year. that's when those are the guys who those decisions get easier at the trade deadline when you're out of it. It's a tougher situation if you're thinking like, and I don't know exactly who this would be. Maybe it's Justin Simmons because he's been here for so long and he's done so much. Maybe if you're thinking about trying to extend him a couple of years, manage the cap number, it becomes harder to part with. Or Jerry Jeudy, he's got the guaranteed 5th-year option. Maybe you go into the year thinking, hey, we're going to try to extend him a couple of years or whatever. But if that's not the case for those guys, then it becomes much easier to survey the market, get the best deal you can, and say, we'll do now what we were likely going to do in January anyways.
Yeah, it like I said, it's going to be interesting to watch how this plays out. Um, Especially when you look at guys like Bowles, look at Justin Simmons, Josie Jewell, especially Simmons. I feel like I think that's probably one player I think a lot of people probably want to keep their eye on
Yeah.
when it gets to that point. Just because maybe out of all the guys they potentially want, if they are indeed selling, he might be the guy who they can get quite a bit from him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do at the deadline, and how it's crazy how these next 3 games could probably decide the direction they take.
Yep, no doubt. They were in a tough spot last year where they won in London and they got to 3-5. And, the players are sort of like, we can get back in this. They had Tennessee, I think, coming out of the bye week, and they still, George Paton, ultimately they got a 1st-round pick for Bradley Chubb, and they said, okay, we have to do this, and we'll try to win without him, and they did not. So, it's like I say, it's sort of it's the biggest story over the next couple of weeks. But obviously, too, Ryan, I mean, before we jump here, short week, short pod, but before we jump, we should talk about Thursday night and maybe about the Chiefs in general, just given that they're up twice on the schedule coming in here. They're an interesting group because they've been good offensively, but they haven't been sort of like what we've seen from them in recent years in terms of the otherworldly, by far the best offense in the NFL. But the defense has been good. By the metrics, the defense has been top 10 in the NFL so far through 5 weeks. So if Denver, I mean, we know the Broncos are going to have to score, in order to beat Kansas City, be a major upset. Kansas City's a 10.5-point favorite. But what's the key, I guess, for the Broncos offense if they're gonna play well and if they're gonna try to score, with the Chiefs on Thursday night?
I think for me, it's the key. It's going to be slowing down the run game.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be one of the keys right there. And when you're dealing with the Chiefs, it can be a lot of things you got to do to pull up a victory against them. We know how good Patrick Mahomes is, Travis Kelsey. I'm not sold on their wide receivers just yet. I think they've underperformed. Um, but that run, Isaiah Pacheco, I think that's going to be key right there. We saw in the New York game how much the run game just changed the direction of that game.
Yep.
I think right there, that's going to be the key. They're going to have to slow down the run, and that's something they have struggled mightily this year. So that for me, when it comes to, on the defensive side, that's going to be the biggest thing is slowing down that run game.
It's kind of funny when you talk about Mahomes. I mean, like if you bring up anything, especially like on social media, right? Like there's just no way to argue his results against really anybody, but especially against the Broncos. He's never lost against the Broncos. Every single time the Chiefs have played Denver with Patrick Mahomes as the quarterback, they've won. Obviously, we know this 15 in a row, going back several years. The one thing that the Broncos have done decently well against him over the last couple of years is they figured out a way to turn him over. They turned him over 3 times in one of the games last year. They got him in the other game. I think Josie Jewell, I can't remember exactly, the late season last year sort of runs together. He either got him twice in one game or he got him once in each. But like they have figured out ways, even as Mahomes has racked it up against them, to create takeaways. And I think they're going to have to do that, tomorrow night in order to stay in the game. And it was interesting listening to Sean Payton talk about Mahomes. And one of the things he sort of marveled at among many is for as much as he moves around and for as much as he creates and for as much sort of like freelancing as he does, he just doesn't take all that many sacks. And so, he said he's hard to get to. So if they can, if you can create a couple of takeaways, that hasn't been enough for the Broncos in recent years against Kansas City. But like that's still, it doesn't change the fact that that's sort of the start of the recipe if you're talking about springing a major upset. So there's that. They've got to play in rhythm on offense. Last year, Kansas City went up 28-0 in Denver, and it looked like it was headed toward Miami 2023 territory. And then the Broncos came all the way back, and they had the ball with a chance to tie the game. Russell Wilson actually got knocked out of that game with a concussion. So there's been some entertainment value, especially last year when these teams have played, but it's a mighty struggle, man. It has been, and it will be again this year, especially if the Broncos defense keeps playing the way it's played so far this season.
Yeah, if Denver's defense plays like the way they've done this year, yeah, it's over by halftime.
Yeah.
And I don't care if he doesn't have a Tyreek Hill as wide receiver anymore, but if the Broncos play the way they've been playing defensively, this is over by halftime. And once again, you're in a situation where that Russell Wilson and the rest of the offense are just trying to put enough points on the board to make it look like a competitive game. That's going to be our biggest concern. If the defense can generate some turnovers, contain the run a little bit, maybe they have a shot. But it's hard. Like it's hard to see them. They haven't done enough. They haven't done enough on defense to say, hey, I think if they do this thing right, they have a shot.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just feel like through 5 weeks, everything has just gone wrong. So it's like it's hard. It's just hard, and I don't think it's going to be pretty Thursday night for the Broncos.
No, I don't think so either. It's amazing. They've given up 938 rushing yards. They're giving up 219 a game over the last 4 since they held Vegas to 62 in the opener. And that gets rightfully so. That gets a lot of attention. That's a historically bad pace, 6.8 yards per carry allowed, not like in a game, over 4 games. So that's bad, but they're also last in the NFL in pass defense efficiency. So it gets almost like overshadowed a little bit by how bad they've been against the run, but it hasn't been any better against the pass either. Some of that is obviously like 70 is going to, tilt your stats for like at least half a season.
Yeah.
But it's been bad. So with that, I imagine you're picking the Chiefs.
Yes, I got it at 35-20. Kansas City's going to win on Thursday night.
Yeah, I got 37-24. I don't know how exactly I landed on those numbers. I think Russell Wilson and the offense played well in both games against Kansas City last year. I think they'll score some, even though Kansas City's defense has been pretty good this year. But I just don't. And then you never know. I mean, if it gets out of hand early, then you've always got the sort of like maybe you put a score or 2 on the board late, that sort of thing. So, but I think Kansas City by multiple scores, not going too far out on a limb there. It's going to be interesting, that's for sure. We will be there at Arrowhead along with Mark Kisla, our columnist, and we'll have a ton of coverage, obviously, even like through the day tomorrow leading up to the game, but especially like, late Thursday night into the day Friday, all weekend after that. We've obviously got you covered, denverpost.com/Broncos. That's it for this week. We will be back next week. A little bit of recuperation for all parties this weekend, perhaps a little mini bye week before the Broncos get ready for the Packers next week. But Chiefs on deck first. Obviously, we'll be there. We'll have all the coverage for you. That's Ryan. I'm Parker. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching if you're watching on YouTube. And we will talk to you soon.